One thing we found out after we retired, and we're both sort of in our mid 60s at that point, we found out something that was extremely surprising to us, and that was that we probably had a 30-year runway. That was because in the 1950s, a lot of public health investments were made in the United States and other places, which resulted in extremely increased health benefits for our generation, which resulted, at least for some sectors of our generation, living longer and healthier and better for years and years and years. So for the first time, people could live to be quite old and still sentient and have all the experience and skills, but still be functional. And we said to ourselves, well, this is astonishing, and this is something we need to do something with.
Yeah, I think the statistic that kind of floored us was that if you live to 60, it's more likely than not that you will live to 90,
Correct.
right? And we said,
Yes.
whoa, that's a long time. I mean, we worked for 40 years. This is another 30. I mean, that's good news, but what are we going to be doing for 30 years? I mean, it kind of really took us aback, I think, to say, are we going to kind of jump around and, one day do this and another day do this for 30 years? That didn't seem
That
very
sounds
appealing to us.
exhausting too.
Yeah. And then we thought about, could we learn something? Okay, we learn it, but then do we want to do it? For everything was like, well, what about this 30 years? And then we met a professor that wrote a book about that,
We did.
right?
Yes.
Up at Columbia. And she was saying the consequences of thinking about 30 years are just everywhere. I mean, you think about what you're going to eat differently, you think about how you're going to, I don't want to talk about exercise, too sensitive, but
One of us does exercise
regularly.
but yes, and how much money do you have to save, and what is your family going to do with you? It's
Where do you
really,
want to live?
it's a huge life change.
Right. You don't have to choose. I mean, I think most of us, or at least me, you thought, okay, I'll pick a place to live and that's where I'll live for the remainder of my life. And then you think 30 years, I've never lived any place for 30 years, right? Will I
Yeah.
live how many different places will I live in 30 years? It's pretty amazing.
We also started to do a little research, which never occurred to us before, into what was retirement supposed to be. And of course, we
Mm.
discovered that it started well over 100 years ago, but it started with concepts of people doing physical work, mostly men, who had life expectancies of around 60, and they'd retire if they were lucky just before 60. At the beginning, they retired when they're 70, which didn't make too much sense. But basically, they only had a couple years to go, and then the idea was to give them enough money so that they could relax and have fun and play, and for the couple years they had left, and that would be the end of it. But that whole concept doesn't work if you have 30 years or more. It just doesn't work. So we realized the whole idea of retirement needed a big revamp.
And so we needed to revamp it.
We did, because we didn't want to live like that. So we started to think about what to do and what exactly the problem was. And we did begin to realize people did not see who we were and what we had to offer, and that we wanted to offer them something, that we didn't actually want to sit in a field in a rocking chair watching grass grow.
But we also looked around and said, what's so interesting is pick up the paper and you'd see that people are moving more, or people are getting divorced more, or I mean, it had permeated people's brains. Maybe they hadn't thought about it in the same way that this professor did, but they had seen that, actually I'm pretty healthy and I want change in my life. So I guess that's what I'm saying. The people were changing things later in life much more frequently than they had in the past.
So that started to center our thinking for what we're going to do next.
Correct.